Hey Grace, so I'm going to make a video for you again for this unit, just so that since now you've tried a couple of times to see maybe where we might be having some disconnect. So the first equation is asking you to solve using the quadratic formula. I'm going to write the quadratic formula here. It's negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, and that's all over 2a. We use the quadratic formula when we can't factor an equation. Actually, you can use the quadratic formula all the time, but factoring is, or solving by square rooting is often a lot faster, so the quadratic formula is kind of like our last resort since it takes so long to solve. So for the first equation, the first thing you have to do is add 2 to both sides. You want to do that because we need to recognize that the 2, the negative 2, everything needs to be on the left-hand side or on the same side so that we use the right signs. So we have negative 2y squared plus 6y plus 2 equals 0. The next thing I notice is that this entire equation can be divided by 2 to give us negative 1y squared plus 3y plus 1 equal to 0. And the only reason I do that is because now I have smaller numbers to work with for a, b, and c. So if you like, remember that a is negative 1, b is going to be 3, and c is going to be 1. So we plug into the formula, we get negative 3 plus or minus the square root b squared, that's 3 times 3, so 9, minus 4 times a, which is negative 1, times c, is negative 4. When you're subtracting a negative, that becomes plus 4, and it's all over 2 times negative 1, or negative 2. Now we simplify a little bit further. We get negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 13 all over negative 2. Remember, this does give you 2 answers. The first is negative 3 plus the square root of 13, and then negative 3 minus the square root of 13, both divided by negative 2. So if I've got a calculator here, I'll do the square root of 13, and I'm going to add a negative 3, so I'm kind of like working backwards with my calculator here, and I'm going to divide it by negative 2, and that gives me negative 0.3, and it actually says negative 0.30277, so on, so on, so on. So that's that negative 0.3 that I see here. If I do my other answer, if I do 13 and we square root it, I don't quite have a scientific calculator here, so I'm going to make it negative. Then I'm going to add a negative 3, and then you're going to divide it by a negative 2. And that gives you the 3.3 answer. So that's using the quadratic formula. And I'm going to try to just erase, this might take too long, parts of this, whoops, so I can keep the quadratic formula there in case we need it again. There we go. Okay, so find the number of real solutions for this equation. And for this we want to use what they call the determinant. The determinant is what's happening underneath the square root there. So that's the b squared minus 4ac. And there's rules about if it's positive, if it's negative, or if it's 0. If it's positive, you get 2 answers. If it's negative, you will get no answers. And if it's 0, you will get 1 answer. So I'm going to label here A, B, and C. So that's negative 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times 8. So that's 9 minus 32, or negative 24. or excuse me, negative 23. So because the answer is negative inside the square root, you're not going to get any real answers, so you would say no solutions, or 0 real number solutions. Okay, let's erase this one. And scroll down. Okay, completing the square. So when you complete the square, a couple things have to happen. First of all, the c term has to go to the other side. 12 is already over there. So we're going to write x squared minus 5x. We're going to leave a blank. And I'm going to write the equals 12, and I'm going to put another blank. I like to put the blank on the right so that I remember whatever I add over here, I have to add on this side. So in the blank goes half of 5, which is 2.5, and then you have to square it. So it's half of 5 squared. I prefer to work with fractions, but you'll see here you get a lot of decimal answers. So it really is your choice. So half of 5 is 5 over 2, and if I square it, I get 25 over 2. So I'm going to add 25 over 2 to this side. Now I can rewrite this as a perfect square, x minus 5 over 2, and if I do 25 over 2 plus 12, I'm going to do some side work. 24 over 2, because I'm changing this to get a common denominator, and 25 over 2. So that's 49 over 2. Now we square root both sides because the squared and the square root cancel each other out. We get x minus 5 over 2 equals plus or minus, square root of 49 is 7 over 2. Oh wait, I forgot to square the bottom. Hold on just a second. I have quite a bit of erasing to do here, so I forgot to square that, which means this needs to be a denominator of 4. It's going to change all of that. I thought something wasn't working out correctly, and I was right. Okay, sorry, let's try this again. We get x squared minus 5x. If I square or divide by 2 and then square it, that's 25 over 4 equals 12 plus 25 over 4. So now when I write this as a perfect square, it's x minus 5 over 2, it's whatever half of that middle term was. Then over here, now I need to get a 4 on the bottom, so it's going to be 48 over 4 plus 25 over 4. That's 73 over 4. Now I square root both sides, and you get x minus 5 over 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 73 over 2. 73 is not a perfect square, but 4 is a perfect square. Now I want to add 5 over 2 to both sides. So my final answer is all working with fractions. X equals plus or minus the square root of 73 over 2 plus 5 over 2. Now this we can do in a calculator so we can see which answer matches ours. So first I'm going to do 73, and I'm going to take the square root, then I'm going to divide it by 2. Then I'm going to add 2.5. And that gives me 6.772 blah blah blah. So there it is right there. The other answer, remember, is 73, square root it, make it negative. So negative square root of 73. Now divide by 2, but still add 2.5, and it's negative 1.77. Completing the square is a pretty rough process, but again, it does work for solving quadratics. Okay, it says use the quadratic formula to solve the equation. If necessary, round to the nearest tenth. So we have a rocket being launched from a 55-foot cliff. The initial velocity is 138 feet per second. Substitute the values into the vertical motion formula. H equals negative 16t squared plus vt plus c. Let h equal 0. Use the quadratic formula to find out how long the rocket will take to hit the ground after it's launched. So we have h equals 0. We have negative 16t squared. The velocity, the initial velocity, is 138 feet per second, so that's 138t plus 55. That's the how far it is up in the air. So your best bet here is going to be to use the quadratic formula. Okay, so we'll have negative b plus, oops, I'm just going to change, I'm going to use the quadratic formula here. You're not going to want to ever try to factor these. Most of them, I don't know that they ever factor. So negative 138 plus or minus the square root of 138 squared minus 4 times negative 16 times 55. And that's all over 2 times negative 16. So lots of simplifying here. Negative 138 plus or minus, I'm going to simplify everything underneath using my calculator. So 138 squared minus 4 times negative 16 times 55. That's 22,564. I'm going to divide that by negative 32. So you're going to get two answers here. One of these answers won't make any sense because it will be negative. The other answer should make sense. It should be positive. So right now you'll see our equation matches first one, second one. So the first one or the second one. So now the question is it 0.4 seconds or 9 seconds? So if we take negative 138 plus the square root of 22564 and you divide by negative 32, you get negative 0.38. Okay, that answer doesn't make any sense because it's negative and you can't have negative time. So we want to do the problem again, except now we want to use the negative square root. So it's still negative 138, but now it's minus that square root. That gives you negative 288 point something. Divide by negative 32, and now you get positive 9.00 something. So 9 seconds. Looks like that's your answer there. So this, when you're doing these problems, I know in your email you mentioned that this is where you were having issues. This is a highlighter. I don't know how it's supposed to work. Oh, there we go. So that's your velocity. That goes in here for V. And then your height, or however tall the cliff is, goes back here for C. So it's pick the right equation and then do the quadratic formula, and you want the positive answer because time is not ever going to be negative. Okay, here's another example where we're finding the number of solutions, actually 2 of them in a row. So let's do a reminder. If b squared minus 4ac is greater, actually no, we'll do that. If it's greater than 0, you have 2 solutions. If it's equal to 0, you have 1 solution. And if it's less than 0, you have no solutions. and maybe you want to write this down in your notebook. So if we do b squared minus 4ac, b is 0, there's no x term, minus 4 times 1 times negative 15, so that's 0 plus 60, that's positive, so that's 2 solutions. The next one, similar situation, b squared minus 4ac, b is 0 because there's no x term, minus 4 times 1 times negative 18, so that's 0 plus, let's see, that's 80 minus 8, 72, and that's, oh, excuse me, that's also positive, that should be a 2, that's also positive, so another 2 solutions. And number 14 says use any method to solve. So the first thing I notice is that all of these numbers are divisible by 2. So that would be 4x squared plus 9x minus 12 equals 0. And looking at this, you know, the numbers are a little big to try to do like a factoring. And then I look over here, I see all my answers are decimal, so this is probably definitely a quadratic formula. So let's write the quadratic formula again. And it's all over 2a. So, negative b, that's negative 9, plus or minus the square root. B squared, that's 81, minus 4 times a times c, that's 4 times negative 12, or 16 times negative 12. It's negative 192, so plus 192, because subtracting a negative, all over 2 times a, which is 8. So this is negative 9 plus or minus the square root 81 plus 192. It's 273, and it's all over 8. So you're going to get 2 answers here. You use your calculator for both because 273 is not a perfect square. So negative 9 plus the square root of 273 divided by 8 is positive 0.94. So it's this answer. If you do it the other way, if you do negative 9 minus the square root of 273 and then divide it by 8, you will get negative 3.19. So, I know again that's a lot of information, but walk through this video or watch this video and let me know when you're ready to reset the test.